Just as much as criticism on YouTube is important to cinema, so is having an award ceremony that can shine a light on films and movies and performances that deserve more attention. An example that comes to mind is last year's Best Picture win for Bong Joon-ho's Parasite. As a foreign language film, that wouldn't get the attention that it truly deserved from the general American populace, but because it has that prestigious title of Best Picture at the Oscars, it becomes a lot more accessible to those American audiences that previously might not have seen it. And although I'm super happy that Parasite won Best Picture at the Oscars, as it's 100% deserving, there's so many more genre films, specifically of the horror genre, that were completely snubbed out of performance awards, directing awards, and Best Picture nods. A shining example of this, and really what was the catalyst for this video, was Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse. But before we go in depth with recent examples of horror movies that have been snubbed as well as other genre films that the Oscars have ignored, I want to talk about classic films and classic performances that the Oscars also ignored. And then later we'll talk about why I feel all of this happens and why the system that the Oscar has for picking winners and nominations is just fundamentally against horror movies and genre films. Starting in 1974 with The Exorcist, there have only been 6 horror films since then nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars, meaning there have been more presidents in that time than there have been horror films nominated for Best Picture. These films include The Exorcist, Jaws, Silence of the Lambs, Sixth Sense, Black Swan, and Get Out. And while these are all great movies that you should definitely go watch if you haven't, especially Black Swan, by the way, that movie is phenomenal. You should definitely go see it. That includes you, editor. Watch that movie, please. There were so many more films that pioneered the genre of horror and cinema as a whole, much more than the list given here. Examples include Psycho, Rosemary's Baby, The Shining, Frankenstein, The Blair Witch Project, Halloween, John Carpenter's The Thing. And I'm only talking about Best Picture here. There are so many more categories, whether it be Best Actress, Best Actor, Cinematography, where horror films have just been completely ignored throughout the years. And I feel like this is definitely due in part to the people on the outside of the genre sort of perceiving horror as this joke of a genre that's not really intent on creating good cinema as much as it is just providing cheap thrills by riding whatever gimmick that's attached to the genre at the time, which is definitely true for a lot of the popular horror movies in the genre. But when you get deeper into it, horror has become one of the most progressive and interesting, boundary-pushing, experimental genres in cinema right now. A lot of people even saw horror as this really gimmicky genre, especially in the 50s and 60s, when they would install electric buzzers in cinema seats and pay people to faint and scream in the theaters, and everything was just very tailored to, again, providing cheap thrills as opposed to actually creating good cinema and pushing the art form forward. It really took films like Night of the Living Dead, Rosemary's Baby, and The Exorcist to get horror out of that area, and 2 of those 3 films weren't recognized at all by the Academy for essentially changing the entire reputation and landscape of a genre. Obviously, I could cite examples of so many snubs throughout the past few years, but some obvious ones include Toni Collette for Hereditary, Essie Davis for The Babadook, James McAvoy for Split, and both Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe for The Lighthouse, I feel deserved nominations at least, and neither of them got them. But outside of just horror, it feels like the Academy just doesn't really like experimental movies. Some of which that I'm fond of, The Lobster, Deadpool, Dark Knight, none of those received Best Picture nominations. So horror films aren't the only ones being snubbed, but I think it stands out in horror more than others because of how, as I said previously, experimental and progressive the genre has become. At the mainstream surface level, there's a lot of really bad content within the genre, but below that, there's so many interesting films and directors and up-and-coming actors and actresses that are getting their start through these boundary-pushing horror movies that aren't getting recognized at the Academy. In In my opinion, the reason we see so much bias towards horror and other genre films is because of the way that they select nominees and winners. And the way they basically do this is by getting actors to vote on who the best actor for that year was, or directors to vote on who the best director was for that year, and so on and so forth. So besides foreign language films and animated features, there are really no genre-based categories in the Oscars. And since the Oscars don't consider genre when selecting people to join the Academy and vote on nominees, the vast majority of people who are deciding these films are people who work on drama films, as dramas statistically make up over 50% of the global film product, whereas horror only makes up about 10% of it. And I'm certainly not saying that a drama director can't appreciate a good horror movie, they certainly can, but I kind of question their bias considering they devote their entire life to creating films of a specific genre sometimes. I feel like there are two ways of solving this, which would be to create genre-specific categories, which is the worst of the two in my opinion, or just simply diversify the Academy to include directors and actors and actresses, etc., of multiple different genres. I feel like as horror fans, we're all sort of fed up with this, and I can't imagine what it must be like for the people who create these works and don't get the recognition that they deserve, or the spotlight that they could use to further their career from. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any opinions or things you'd like to say, leave them in the comment section. We are always open to suggestions on improving our videos. So yeah, I know you 7 subscribers been holding out on us. I'm sorry, we're sticking to a upload schedule of once a year from now on. So yeah, stay tuned for the 2021 video. Have a nice day.